The British author A. A. Milne, and we've debated the pronunciation. We've tried Milne, Milne, we've kind of conjugated it, we've declined it. Finally, Spike said, why don't we just go with Milne? A. A. Milne wrote a lot of things, but one of the things that he was most famous for, and many of you will probably, who are literary folk, will know this, were the Winnie the Pooh sagas and stories. That's where his name became famous, with Winnie the Pooh. Many great quotes in there, but one of the quotes that I like from Milne and the AA and the Winnie the Pooh saga is the one that says, sometimes I sit and think, and sometimes I just sit. Sometimes I sit and think, and sometimes I just sit. Do you think maybe that David, as he wrote, is credited with so many Psalms, this great book in the Bible, just sometimes just sat on a hillside watching the sheep and thought? Sometimes he probably just sat there and allowed what Shirley was talking about today, what we all experienced, whether we came from a long way off or close by or whatever, the beauty of the trees in bloom, the beauty of spring growing, all of these things that David just sat there and thought, oh my goodness, what can I do? One of the Psalms that he wrote, I want to read just 2 verses from it. Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. He has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and the hearing of his word. The commentaries tell us that if we read on with this psalm, there are 3 different parts of it. That's the first part. The psalms for the people of Israel were like our hymns, like what we do in worship service. They were their worship service. This was the introduction. What an introduction. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they who dwell therein. Wherever you are, whoever you are, this is the message. David found these things and reflected upon them and captured them. Capture them in the words that we quote so often. Spike referenced Psalm 23 this morning. 121, one of my favorite, absolute favorite songs. I will lift up mine eyes to the hills. From whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Words of comfort. Words from the God who loves you and me. From the God who loves us. Not from the God who wants to see us fail. From the God who wants to sneak up on us and kick us in the butt. Kick us in the back, say bad things. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to slip up like that. Please don't censor me, Facebook. I didn't mean to do that. That God isn't this God. How can you look at this God and not see a God of absolute love? Sometimes our schedules are just so hectic. Shirley talked about the hectic schedule of her week. But in that hectic, when you get through with it, you come away and realize how beautiful it was, don't you? All of the people that you got to see, the people that you got to share with, the things that you got to do. You find yourself that sometimes you just don't seem to have time to just sit. Time to just sit and think. Time to let the Spirit move through us. Time to just let the Spirit come and go. When Skip Smith was active as an elder here, and I hope you're watching, Skip, Penny, he was always using, being a full-time farmer as he is, he was always using the agrarian examples of things that he would see while riding on the tractor on the farm, while working in the fields. The things that remind us of the majesty and glory of his name. Let me ask you, when was the last time that you were alone for a long period of time, or for too much of a period of time? When was the last time that you had time by yourself without the cell phone? I was going to say without a beeper, but that dates me too much. But without a cell phone, let alone a landline, any of these other devices, something that connects you. It's hard to find times like that, for we never seem to really be alone. There's always some way that somebody can find us. I personally, I don't do alone real well. I don't do alone real well. I think back of the days several years ago when the new owners of the State Journal decided that, as to quote the new owner, your services are no longer needed. When he told me this, and then after 38 years of getting up and going to work every morning, 38 years, I got up the next morning and I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have any requirement on my time. I was lost. I was absolutely, for a period of, if it hadn't been for this church and my family helping to support me during that period of time, to hold me up, I just felt like that a portion of the world had been cut off. But as time went on, I began to cherish the time that I could spend with God, the time that I could spend with others, the time that I could spend on what we're doing here. And it turned out to be a real blessing. And since that time, I've told the publisher of the paper, greatest thing you ever did, and I thank you for it. Because if it hadn't happened then, it would have happened sometime soon. He said, well, I'm glad, Phil, we've been able to establish a friendship after I fired you. So, there are things that come out of this to give us the time. What was the time when we are actually alone and get to talk to God? Where do you go to find God? Where can you find God? Here? At home? The writer John Muir wrote these words, and as I wrote them down, and I thought of Sally and Sarah and living in the forest as they do, those of you that live on farms and out in the country. The clearest way to the universe is through a forest. The clearest way through a universe is through the forest. When you can go and just walk, commune, alone. But not everyone has that opportunity. So we have to find our own forest to walk through, to be able to connect with God, because God is there, God is waiting. Where did Jesus go right after he was baptized? Did he go to the temple for his bar mitzvah? Did he go to a party? No. He went into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights. To be tempted, to be tested, to find himself, to find that what God wanted him to do was what he wanted to do. And he had time alone, time to experience these things. In that experience, he came out and he had the focus that he wanted. Finally, at the end of it, he said, "Get away from me, devil. I don't want to have anything to do with you. You've shown me cities, you've shown me power, you've shown me all sorts of things. I don't want that. I will serve the Lord my God, and him only will I serve." After his experience walking through the forest, he was able to see exactly what it is that God wanted him to do. We find in God the big things and the tiniest of things. I'm reminded of the story of the mustard seed in Matthew 6:25 when Jesus is talking, and he says, if you have faith the size of the grain of mustard seed. You know how little a mustard seed is, don't you? How about a radish seed? My wife gave me this package of radish seed last fall, and she said, "Why don't we plant these for fall crops?" Well, I got one place that's so thick it looks like you need to mow the tops off of them, and then the other one, they're in the radish anywhere to be found. They're so tiny. But we got the picture. We understand what God, Jesus says. He could have said to us a radish seed, and if we do gardens, we know what a radish seed looks like, how tiny they are. That much faith, you can move a mountain. So far, I haven't known anyone that had that, because you get to thinking, well, I wonder if I have it. And when you wonder, you're like Charlie Brown, a great pumpkin patch. You know, you've wondered, is there really a great pumpkin? You've wondered, can I do it? And by wondering, you've eliminated the possibility. But nonetheless, the example is there. That's the amount of faith we need to experience the presence of God. Just have a little bit of faith. Look at the lilies of the field, that story in Matthew 10:29. If God cares for them, if God clothes them in all this beauty, greater than Solomon, if God protects the birds of the air, what do you think he's going to do for you? What do you think he's going to do to you? The crowning glory of his creation, the majesty of his creation. What is he going to do for you? In these little things, we can find God and see his presence. How do we react to these things? How do we react to God? How do we feel when we feel that presence of God? I hope for you it's a feeling of peace and tranquility. Unfortunately, for too many people, and that's what we're trying to hone in on here to hopefully help people who are adults and have had a bad experience in church, perhaps as a young person or some other time in their lives, to hone in on the fact that this God cares more about you than anyone else possibly ever could. How do we do that? How do we get over the challenge of sharing that? Because so many people have grown up having God hammered into them, pounded on the pulpit. All of this thing. I now and then I can't hit the Bible too much because there's not too much left. It's just about to disintegrate itself. Not because I hit it, but probably because I try to use it. How do we get this? This is what we're seeking. This feeling that we are at one. That we are at one with the God who never, ever, 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 never leaves us alone. Just know that when he feels the furthest away, perhaps that's when he's the closest. Just know when you are struggling and you feel like you are alone, he's there. We could quote the footprints that we've all heard many times. We know the sentiment of that. God carries us. We are never alone. Sometimes I sit and think. Sometimes I just sit. May we bow together in prayer. Our Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here, to gather around our devices at home or wherever, to share this service with others who are in need and struggling for direction and hope and want to know what you are like. Let them know that you are love. That you are love and you care for us, and that we are never, ever, ever, ever alone. It's in his name we ask it.